get down to figuring out what his objectives are is very difficult. He's enunciated one objective clearly, which is that he wants the oil sands to produce 6 million barrels of oil a day. He's enunciated very few objectives, and that's one he sticks to. In the early phases of the formation of the new Conservative Party, when they started using the word Tory to describe the party, he was quoted as saying he was uncomfortable being described as a Tory party because his party really didn't come from conservative tradition. It was really more libertarian. So from what I've seen, I think it could very well be about the destruction of our capacity to govern by destroying institutions. So starving various branches of government from the ability to function effectively, so things begin to fall apart. Right, not putting new people on the immigration review panels, for instance, so they get clogged. Not having a new health accord negotiated. So the kinds of, not benign neglect, but actually neglect, letting things start to fall apart through lack of, and then being able to say, we have to turn to the private sector. So when the prisons become overcrowded with double bunking because of mandatory minimums, which everybody knew in the criminology literature, mandatory minimum sentences don't work, we've brought them in for a wide range of things, but the provinces are going to have to bear the cost of the overcrowded prisons. I think it's possible at that point. He'll say, well, build private prisons for profit. So why would we lose? I couldn't figure out why, because his agenda was very much about border security. Security, prosperity, partnership, we want border security. That's something he's been championing. Yet they've laid off a ton of the workforce at the border. So again, private security firms might have to step in because we don't have to work. So I think his agenda could be about, since he doesn't like the idea of government, eroding the ability of government to function through cutbacks, although he's spending more money than any prime minister ever spent. So it also hobbles the country in terms of debt deficit. It's hard to also know, one of my friends who's observed him closely said, and I think this was right too, Harper isn't about building things, he's about destroying things. So the other thing that's been destroyed, it's not just that he muzzles scientists. The concept of evidence-based decision-making is being destroyed, and the entities that gather the evidence are being removed. So we're removing not just the process of evidence-based decision-making, but the possibility of evidence-based decision-making. So it's a very radical, transformative change to Canada. So what's left is, we're still a democracy. If we can communicate to Canadians exactly what he's doing, we can get it repaired. One concern I have is that it won't be enough to vote in a different party at the end of the next election. Because without being cynical or saying anything negative about Tom Mulcair or Justin Trudeau, it's not in the makeup of their parties and their traditions to walk into the new office for the new Prime Minister in Langevin block and say, oh dear, I have too much power. We must fix this. Because it means dictatorships are efficient.
Yes.
They can do things fast. You're not caught up in the long process of getting things through the House or getting political consensus. So this is when during prorogation, instead of whatever else I was going to do, I'm taking the town hall meetings that we're doing in Saanich-Gulf Islands and just continuing them across the country. So I'm doing a democracy tour through most of Canada, because I think if we don't talk about what's happening, then in the next election, and I'm quite sure the Conservatives won't form government again. I feel pretty confident about that. I feel Harper won't be there and somebody else. But I don't want to take the risk that as a non-partisan, substantive and generic issue, we neglect the fact that Harper has dismantled all of our basic institutions. We no longer have the Parliament supreme. We no longer have the Parliament control the public purse. We no longer have evidence-based decision-making. We no longer have any, and we don't very rarely have members of Parliament speak their own mind. They're controlled and scripted. And they're controlled and scripted in all the parties. So if we're going to fix it, we have to have Canadians understand more broadly and have an election campaign next time around that includes a demand for repairing democracy by reducing the power and control of the Prime Minister's office, reducing the budget of the Prime Minister's office, restoring members of Parliament, restoring the fact that Parliament is supreme and Prime Minister's report to Parliament. Ideally, we'd get rid of the leader's signature on the nomination papers for candidates, because that's what gives them the clout to threaten their own MPs. Getting rid of first past the post, another key piece we talked about. So repairing democracy, there's enough, what we've got left is we still elect a government. But if we vote in a kind of a passive, oh, well, we have enough of that guy, we're going to take that guy, but if we're not really engaged, we won't be able to hang on to democracy at all.
How are we going to get people engaged? I find this with friends of mine in Vancouver, and I say, they think, some of them think Harper's wonderful, and I go, what? How can you even say that? I mean, and then you ask them, and I had one man who was really embarrassed, and I said, don't you ever read anything? I was getting really cross.
Well, it's hard because
he was embarrassed, but he said, oh, well, it's good for business.
Well,
and this is what you hear quite often, so it's not going to be easy to turn a lot of people around.
Well, the other thing is that there's a lot of the business community that doesn't think Harper's good for business,
well, I hope
so that will help. And certainly small businesses having a harder time. But even the oil patch, this gambit, I don't know if you've heard of this, we haven't seen the letter, but Stephen Harper apparently wrote to Barack Obama and said, if you approve the Keystone Pipeline, we'll do something about climate. I mean, well, really? I mean, how? Especially since Barack Obama and Stephen Harper signed the same document in Copenhagen, signing on to the same targets. And again, going back to the media, they're all reporting this as if it's a novel offer. I say, well, Nancy Wilson from CBC asked me yesterday morning, wouldn't it be a good thing to have Stephen Harper and Barack Obama agree on targets? Certainly you're not against that. I said, oh, not against that. They did it in 2009, and Barack Obama's about to achieve his targets, and we're nowhere near ours, so why would Barack Obama believe Harper now? Why would anyone, right? He's been against climate action